Thank you for joining us for a virtual fireside chat with Anshul Ruparell, co-founder and CEO of Properly, for a discussion about the real estate market in Toronto. Is it a good time to enter the market? Is it a bubble? What are the trends that you need to know right now? Anshul Ruparell is the co-founder and CEO of Properly, a tech-enabled real estate brokerage on a mission to make real estate more customer-centric for Canadians. Born and raised in Calgary, Anshul grew up in a family of real estate entrepreneurs. When a career in venture capital took him stateside, he was inspired by the dynamic innovation happening in the US real estate category and returned to Canada to co-found Properly in 2018. Anshul has extensive experience in launching and building other startups, Poncho, Merlin, Managed by Q, Venture Capital, FJ Labs, and private equity, CPPIB. Anshul holds an HBA from Ivey Business School and an MBA from Columbia Business School. Some quick housekeeping notes. Please make sure to ask any questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll open up an audience Q&A at the very end of this chat. So now I'd like to introduce Jason Maganoy, Head of Business Development at St. Joseph Media, and our new Associate Publisher, Canadian Business. Thank you both so much for your time today, and take it away, Jason.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Chantel, and thank you so much for joining us, Anshul. I'm really excited to have this discussion. But my first question for you is, how are you, and how have you been holding up during the pandemic?
Nice to meet Jason, and thanks so much for having me here. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to do so. I think that, like most people, the early part of the pandemic was challenging, and as the leader of a company, we're very focused on ensuring that our team and their families were safe. But after that, there was also quite a bit of opportunity for us to bring a lot of the dynamics you would typically see in e-commerce to the real estate industry. And I think that the acceleration of adoption of a lot of the tech-enabled or digital-first tools has been really exciting to see. And then beyond that, I had a baby a couple months ago, so that's been a big change.
It's amazing. I'm actually my wife is pregnant as well. She's giving birth in the middle of July. So you look great. You look rested. It must be a really incredible time for you.
Yeah, congrats. I've got lots of coffee, so it helps.
So tell us about your career. How did you come to create Properly?
Sure. So I, as mentioned before, I'm from Calgary, and then I moved out to Ontario, went to school, and I started my career in Bay Street. I worked at an investment bank for a couple of years, and then I spent a few years working in private equity investing. And I had an amazing experience. I learned a lot, but it wasn't really my passion to simply support and invest in big companies. I felt a pull to do something a lot more entrepreneurial, and so I ended up moving to New York. I went to business school. I did my MBA at Columbia, and then I'd spend a day a week in school and 6 days a week just immersing myself in the startup ecosystem there, working with a number of companies in roles in product and ops and marketing. And I started to work with this idea for a company of my own. And in the exercise of getting that idea off the ground, I met this really well-known entrepreneur, this guy named Fabrice Grinda, who had built and scaled and sold a couple of multi-billion-dollar companies and had founded this venture capital fund called FJ Labs. FJ Labs is an early investor in a bunch of companies you'll probably know, like Airbnb and Uber and Alibaba and Clearbank and Skip the Dishes. And I told him about this idea, and he told me it was terrible. And he was right. And the two of us got along pretty well, and he ended up inviting me to join him at his fund. And so I joined FJ Labs, and I did two things with them. One is I spent a couple of years investing in startups, and so led investments in 30 or 35 different early stage companies, and helped to co-lead their investment team. And then I spent the other half of my time actually incubating or building companies with them. And so we built two companies together while I was there. One of them was an insurance marketplace, and one of them was a marketplace connecting hourly workers with small businesses. And both those companies grew and actually ultimately got acquired. And after a couple of years of doing that, I started to work on this idea that eventually has morphed its way into what's now Properly. And some context that's relevant that I didn't share is that my entire family background is in real estate, and literally the first thing my grandfather did when he came to Canada was to get his real estate license. So I've been immersed in this industry for a very long time growing up, and we can get into it a little bit later, but that is what inspired me to eventually start Properly with my two co-founders.
So, obviously in that role, you were seeing a lot of different startups over the course of your time in that role. Like, what makes a good one? Like, what were some of the ingredients of the companies you were investing in that you're like, man, like there's a common thread here amongst all of these businesses? Like, what do you look for?
Um, there's like a very detailed set of heuristics I can share, but the three most simple ones are a very significant customer pain point. So
Mm,
something that people are having difficulty with that is not being solved effectively by the existing tools that exist in the context of a market that has the potential to become very big, even if it isn't necessarily big today, and then is being managed by a team that is exceptionally resilient, because building a startup is really difficult and more things go wrong than go right, but has a grit and drive to both push through the challenging parts of the journey, and then to inspire and motivate and recruit amazing people to join them on that journey as they go from that seedling of an idea into what hopefully will become a transformational 1,000-person multi-billion dollar company.
mm,
And so those are the things that we look for.
mm.
And I was very bad at identifying what makes a good founder early on, and over time, especially after starting a couple companies of my own, I came to realize what it actually takes.
Mm. I mean, so I remember the process of me buying my first condo, and it felt like complete chaos. It felt like I was always on the phone. I was always getting back papers and faxes. I was getting faxes, and I was going like, okay, this is like a. And I'm younger, so I was like, I feel very ill equipped for what I'm doing, and I don't really know what I'm signing, but I think it's all going to be okay. So how does Properly help? How does it work?
I mean, I think that your experience is one that is consistent for most people. Despite the fact that residential real estate, is one of the biggest industries in Canada, with 17% of GDP, there's $400 billion a year of homes bought and sold in the country. And Toronto on its own is about a quarter of that. So there's over $100 billion of homes sold each year in Toronto. And so it's a massive industry. And for those that are going through the experience of buying or selling a home, as you've been through, it's probably the most significant milestone at that point in time in your life. And the stakes are exceptionally high. Um, and despite all of that, there's been effectively no innovation in this industry, in Canada in particular, in decades. The experience of searching for a home online is one that forces you to use tools that resemble the early days of the internet, and haven't seen much evolution. And then, as you're describing, the actual exercise of buying and selling is one that's wrought with uncertainty and expense and stress, and is designed not in a way that actually meets your needs, but rather in a way that was supportive of the industry 15 or 20 years ago, and properly exists to modernize this industry. And so we are effectively, in a simplistic way, we're a modern tech-enabled real estate brokerage, and we offer a set of services that are designed to help you find and buy your dream home, and to sell your current home for the best possible price. All we're making the process dramatically more simple. And so there's two ways that we do that. The first is that we're revolutionizing the experience of searching for a home online. And so you can use our free best-in-class tools. You can find them at properly.ca, and you can use them to go and search for that perfect home, and to book tours and look at photos, and get all the information you need to know about the neighborhood. And you can also track the value of your home, or any home in that market for that matter, like you would the value of your stock portfolio. And so that's in search and discovery. And then we're also modernizing the transaction itself. And so our flagship service makes it possible for you to unlock the equity in your old home before you've actually sold it. So you can go and buy that next home as soon as you find it, close on it, move
Wow.
into it. And once you've done so, we'll then list your existing home in the market. So you don't need to line up closing dates. You don't need to be worried if your home will sell, and you can avoid living through the sale and listing process altogether.
It's funny because like I tried to interact with Properly, and I used it, and I thought it was just really, I was just trying to get a value assessment for my home. It was really, really like high tech experience. Like you were texting me. And do you find that like, how do you build trust in a platform like this? Because it's almost like you're saying there was no advancement in the sector, and now you're very advanced. And because you're so advanced, it feels a little weird interacting with the product. How do you build trust, and how do you make people more comfortable, considering that you've already propelled the industry pretty far along?
Um, it's a really good question, and it relates to the concept we were describing before, where this is an exceptionally high consideration transaction. The stakes are really high. You don't buy or sell too many homes in your lifetime, and it's really important that you feel like your needs are being met and you're not sacrificing anything by working with a company like Properly, or any real estate service provider for that matter. And so at a really high level, we think about our building trust as being the consistent delivery of our commitments. And so if we do what we say we're going to do every single time, then we're going to be in a position to build trust, and that's going to result in a bunch of downstream beneficial effects for us. So right now, every single online review we have is 5 stars. Our net promoter score is 85, which that's the share of customers who are likely to recommend us to a friend or family member. So that compares to the traditional real estate industry with a 5 or 6. Companies like Airbnb, they're in the 40s. So it's a really high rating. And there's a couple of things that we do to drive that. The first is that we pay attention to every single customer touch point. So the experience you have interacting with one of our ads on Facebook through to the mortgage broker we might refer you to when you're getting financing needs to be above our high and very consistent quality bar. The second thing is that we need to align our incentives to that of the customer. So we only succeed if you succeed. And we need to make sure that there's no perception of misaligned incentives, as has historically been the case in a lot of the more traditional aspects of the real estate industry. Another thing that we've done is we've partnered with trusted institutions. And so it's important for our customers to have the ability to work with any lender or financial institution of their choice. And so we partner with all of them. And so when you work with Properly, you're also working with the RBCs and BMOs and CIBCs of the world. And then the final thing is more of a cultural point, which is that one of our cultural values is to put people first. And so there's zero tolerance for a negative or poor customer experience. And we will always default to doing what's best for the customer, even if it's at the expense of the company. And so if you do that consistently enough, it shows up in your brand and results in you building trust. That said, it's still early for us, and I think we've got a long ways to go, but thus far it's been working.
And speaking of trust, like you've had an amazing roster of angel investors who have been supporting Properly. You raised 100 million, which is incredible, by the way. So why did you do that?
So we've got a very big vision. We're trying to transform and modernize the Canadian real estate market. And doing so requires us having access to the best investors and advisors and operators that can help us actually go and realize that ambition. And we also need the right amount of capital to fuel our growth. And so we need to make sure that we can attract and hire the best people, that we can fund marketing campaigns. And our core service, sale assurance, which allows our customers to buy first and sell later, an aspect of that service is that we're effectively guaranteeing your existing home sale. So if it doesn't sell within a couple months on market, we'll buy it. Now, if we end up buying it and reselling it, we give you all the upside. And so there's nothing being left on the table. But that insurance that we're providing requires us having the capital needed to actually come in and buy that home. And so we've created this large dedicated pool of capital that exists solely to fund those purchases should we need to make them.
Wow. That's incredible. That sounds awesome. My next question is, and it's about real estate in Toronto. Like one of the things that if you're on TikTok and you're looking at real estate TikTok, you are seeing that the city is it's chaos out there. Like there's super expensive, tons of bidding wars all over the place, adding to that uncertainty. So why is housing so inaccessible in Toronto? Is it a price problem or is it an income problem?
So there's 2 factors that immediately come to mind. The first is supply. And so like any market, the relative balance of supply and demand will drive price. And Toronto historically has been a very underbuilt city. That might be surprising to most people because you look downtown, you see condo towers going up everywhere. And we've built a lot of condo supply, but there's been very little increase in the supply of single family homes, which happen to be those that are most in demand right now, especially in the midst of a pandemic. And so because those are the homes that are most in demand and there's very little incremental supply being built, it's resulting in a big imbalance, far more demand than supply. And as a result, prices are rising quickly. And so that's one very influential factor that's driving up prices. The second is that there's this, and this has been true in a couple of periods of time in Toronto's history, where there's this very big fear of missing out. And so if you are shopping for a home, you've bid on 6, 7, 8, maybe even 10 or 12 homes some of our customers are bidding on, you're frustrated, it's been going on for such a long time and prices keep rising every month. You get to a point where you say, well, if prices are going to keep rising, then I'm just going to bid a higher price than is suggested by the market, because within a couple of months, the prices will rise into that and I will have paid not an above market price, but effectively an at market price. And when enough people do that, it results in prices rising very quickly. And that's a very speculative dynamic. And there have been cases in Toronto's history, including early this year, where that dynamic was very much prevalent. That said, from an income perspective, regulators have put in place a number of protections that make it difficult to buy a home that you can't afford. And so, for example, there's a stress test that exists that says you can only qualify for a mortgage if you can afford to pay for that mortgage, even if interest rates rise a dramatic amount. And banks beyond that are saying we're going to look really closely into your income to make sure that you can actually afford to buy this home. And so, it's not that people are buying homes that they can't afford; it's that there's very little supply of affordable homes in the market.
You've described a bunch of different things there. So, is it a good time like to enter the market right now, or should I just give up? Like in Toronto, or should I just give up and move to the suburbs?
There's definitely what some people characterize as a great reshuffling going on, where many folks are realizing, especially given that companies are allowing them to work remotely, and that's expected to be the case even after the pandemic ends, that they don't necessarily need to be downtown anymore, and that they can afford to live a little bit further away from the city, and to enter regions that they might otherwise not have even considered. From a is it a good time to enter the market perspective? Interest rates are very low, and are unlikely to stay low for a long time. And so, from an affordability perspective, it for many people is a good time to take advantage of. And in recent months, it seems like the price appreciation in the Toronto market has slowed. And so, whereas earlier this year prices were rising by 3, 4, 5% every month, over the last couple of months prices have been largely flat. But it really is a function of your personal financial circumstances. And so, if you can afford to buy a home and you continue to see a lot of value in being in the city center, then it appears to be a good time to take advantage of low rates. But as we just touched on, prices are high in the city, and so for most people, they're starting to look elsewhere.
So, what are, like you just described a few, but what are the real estate trends that we need to know right now?
A really big one, unsurprisingly to most, will be that work from home continues to influence buyer behavior. And so a preference for outdoor living areas and rooms that can function as dedicated office space are driving a lot of demand. And so we're seeing that the suburbs are appreciating a lot faster than central Toronto. So areas that historically were more affordable, where you can buy bigger homes that have backyards. And because people are increasingly comfortable with a commute a couple days a week or the ability to work remotely, they're not necessarily feeling constrained by the need to be on the subway line or within a short drive of the city center. And so a pretty interesting trend actually is that we're seeing that historically a lot of the suburban regions of Toronto would trade at a discount to the city center. So if you're buying a home, for example, in Mississauga, it would be about 40% below the price of living in the city center. That spread is actually converging. And so we're seeing that a lot of the suburban aspects of the GTA, their prices are rising faster than the city center is. And so again, going back to that idea of the great reshuffling or rebalancing, it seems like we're starting to see that that prices across the city are normalizing a little bit more than was the case historically. Another factor for folks to consider is that back at the beginning of the pandemic, the condo market in particular started to see some pretty meaningful negative trends in price and liquidity. So it was a lot more difficult to sell a condo, and prices were going down pretty quickly. That trend has reversed, and the condo market is now a lot more stable than it once was. And the final point that I'll bring up is that, and a CIBC economist just published a report on this quite recently, is that an increasingly large share of home buyers in Toronto are receiving down payment funds from their families, many of whom are recognizing interest rates are low. It's a good time to get into the market. And so we'll give you the capital you need to enter the market.
Wow. I mean, hearing all of these different things about sort of, the prices are equalizing in areas outside of Toronto. In terms of Toronto, are you optimistic about the city as we emerge from the pandemic? And what do you think Q4 in Toronto is going to look like?
I'm highly optimistic about Toronto as a city. It's where the majority of Canadian companies are headquartered. It has top schools, very high rates of immigration, a rich cultural fabric and density of ambitious, intelligent people. And as as work from home starts to transition to working from an office, and as tourism reopens and as schools start to accept people in person, we're going to see a lot more people taking advantage of being in the city center. And when we look south of the border to the US in markets that have reopened, it certainly seems like that is the case. People are returning to the office at rates that many folks were not necessarily predicting. So continue to be optimistic about Toronto and expect that the city will continue to do quite well. That said, I think that a lot of the dynamics we've been describing about people's abilities to now move to areas that they can afford a bigger home with access to amenities that they want, that isn't tethered to the downtown, that dynamic's not going away. And so I think we're going to continue to see a lot of people interested in moving to more rural parts of Ontario or even parts of Canada that they otherwise wouldn't have found necessarily to be as appealing. We've had employees on our team move to Halifax, for example, because they recognize that they can work as effectively on our team there as they would here, and they can get access to a very different lifestyle than they'd be able to afford in Toronto.
And this is like another question I wanted to go back to properly on. In terms of the offers you make on houses, in terms of like the equity or the market value of the house, like I feel like sometimes people want to get into the market just to get into a bidding war because they want to ramp up the prices. How do you determine pricing or the market price of a home in a neighborhood in Toronto?
So we look at dozens of factors, the most influential of which are the prices that homes sold for most recently. But then we look at a variety of other factors like how much traffic is on the street, proximity to local schools and amenities and parks, and anything that might influence somebody's appeal to or demand for a particular home. And we use that to predict what price the home will sell for on the open market. And our predictions are very, very accurate. They've been most consistently the most accurate predictions of any company of our kind in Canada. And our goal is to help our buying customers go and be armed with the information they need to understand, is this a home that I can actually afford? We don't want our customers who are bidding for homes going to a house that might be listed for $1 million, even though the market value is probably closer to $1.5 million, and they're going to get into a situation where they get caught in a bidding war. And then for our selling customers, we're guiding them towards setting a list price that is going to help them achieve the best possible sale price for their home. And so it's, there's obviously like a bit of a conflict. We want our buyers to be paying a fair price. We want our sellers to be getting the highest possible price. But because we're armed with these tools and our instant estimate products, our customers tend to be at an advantage relative to others in the market.
And I love the idea of all these different factors you use to determine the pricing. But in terms of perception, like one of the things that I started to do when I was even starting using Properly and looking at pricing for the house that I'm in now, the house across the street from mine, literally just right there, I'm looking at it, is double the price, apparently, according to the listing that I see online. And I don't know why. Like they're across the street. So how, like when we have perceptions like that in terms of pricing, if I were to plug into the Properly app and I get a number and it's like, whoa, it's way lower than my neighbor across the street, how do I sort of get my head around that?
So there's a couple factors that can result in that type of dynamic. The first is, and this is actually a very influential one in Toronto, is school ordinance zoning. And so oftentimes we'll see houses that are literally across the street from each other or next door to each other, where one is in a certain school and catchment zone and one is in a different one. And that results in a very different value for that particular property.
Wow.
If one school is a higher rated school than the other. And then the other, which is quite influential, is the condition and renovated state of the home. And so we see a lot of, in particular downtown Toronto, a lot of really old homes where you might have a couple homes that are both built in 1902, but one has been substantially renovated and one hasn't been. That can have a very, very meaningful impact on the ultimate sale price of that property.
So we're gonna open it up for questions from the audience. If you have any questions, please plug them into the Q&A chat box. But my question for you, my next one is, so what's next for you? Like what's next for Properly? And is there anything exciting that you'd like to share with the audience today?
We're growing really quickly right now. The number of people using our free digital products is increasing at a really excitingly high rates. And the number of customers that are choosing to work with Properly to buy or sell is also growing. And so with that growth comes a need for us to just scale our capabilities to serve that customer demand. And so we're growing our team very quickly across all functions: product development, marketing, operations, sales, and the real estate agents on our team. And so for anyone looking for the next challenge or opportunity, there's certainly some great ones available at Properly. The second thing is that we're constantly evolving and innovating our digital products. And so every week we're releasing new tools, new features, and we've got some exciting stuff planned over the course of the coming months that I can't share quite yet, but you should pay attention to the website and you'll see it. And then finally, is we're expanding our capabilities to serve more customers. And so today we focus on the Greater Toronto Area, but very soon we'll be across the entirety of Ontario and a couple other markets of Canada as well.
And that's actually a good segue into a question that I have, which is about how you iterate the product itself. Like, is it determined by the signals you're getting from this rapidly growing audience you have, or is it just more your experience in real estate? There are things that you experience in your own journey and you're kind of trying to fill those pain points. How do you make decisions to iterate your product?
There's two really high level things we do. The first is we can see the behavior on the site. And so we will observe very quickly if certain users are drawn to certain features or more so than others. And we'll use that to understand, okay, well, that'll trigger a question, which is, why is that happening? Which will then lead to a series of questions that will kind of come to that second pillar, which is we'll talk to the customers directly. And we'll hear from them, what are their biggest challenges? What are the things that they're using our product to do in a relatively hacky or scrappy way that we might be able to automate further and to create a tool that will serve the needs of a far greater share of Canadians or of our user base. It's a very inarticulate and long-winded way of saying that we just talk to our customers all the time. We're interviewing our users multiple times a week, every single week. We're speaking to our customers on the phone daily, and we can take all of that input into informing a number of hypotheses that we'll then go and test. We don't presume to know right away what the right answer is to something. There'll be a number of different things that we could do to solve a customer's problem. And so we'll go and test a bunch of them, figure out which one works most effectively, and then we'll go and put our resources behind that.
A question from the audience here. Why would a buyer's agent show a properly property with a low commission when he or she could show a regularly commissioned home?
So two things to note on that question. The first is that if you're a customer working with Properly, we actually charge the same commission as working with any real estate agent. And so working with Properly costs 5% if you're listing a home. And a buyer agent who is looking at one of our properties will receive the full commission that they would if they were buying or working with the customer to buy any other home in the market. So there's no discounts. Agents are not forced to take any sort of discounts at all. The second thing is that we, in almost all cases, our customers are selling their home after they've moved out of it. So we enable our customers to buy their next home, move into it, and once they've done so, we'll then list their existing home in the market. So they don't have to live through the stress of staging and showings. And because the home is vacant, we can then have the time it takes to actually repair the home, to clean it, to paint it, to make sure it looks amazing. And we actually give our customers access to a $20,000 interest-free advance to fund home repairs. So they can invest that money and get in the home looking exceptional so that it can hopefully sell for a slightly higher price. And then that advance is repaid out of the eventual sale proceeds. And so Properly homes tend to be well staged, well photographed, cleaned, and repaired, and just in a better state than most other homes that are listed for sale in the market.
Even just describing that process, what you just described there, it's like, man, like I think about the processes that I've seen and been a part of. It's just like, man, it's not like that at all. That's so much better. Question from Joseph: In what other ways do you see tech influencing the real estate market and how we engage with the real estate market?
If we take a step back, and I'm going to focus on residential real estate because that's where our focus is and our expertise is. From the beginning of a home purchase journey to the end, so starting to search for that home online through to actually closing on the eventual purchase, getting financing, there's more than 100 steps involved. And almost every one of those steps requires you to interact with someone in the offline world. And in many cases, you're interacting with 10 or 15 different intermediaries. There's the agent, there's the bank, there's the broker, there's the conveyancing lawyer, there's the insurance company, there's all these different stakeholders, photographer, stager, inspector, appraiser, that you need to manage. And we are starting by focusing on the exercise of buying the home and selling the home and doing that in a digitally enabled way, while ensuring that our customers don't have to sacrifice any of the best parts of working with an agent. But there's so much more that we can bring online. So for example, the closing process today requires you to send physical documents to a lawyer. In many cases, I should meet with them in person. The upfront home searching phase requires you to go and visit a bunch of properties in person to get a good feel for them. And so there's so much we can do to bring 3D tours to homes and home search to completely digitize and streamline the closing process, to avoid you needing to go and engage with all the banks. And we're just at the beginning of a revolution that we're happy is accelerating, but there's so much more to go.
Next question from Trisha. What percentage of homes have you assessed that don't sell at what you thought they would?
It's because the real estate market has been appreciating so quickly in Toronto. It is very, very, very rare for a home to sell for below the price that we expected it to. It's happened a couple of times, and it's generally speaking because there were some issues with the home that we weren't aware of up front. So for example, something that came up in the inspection that would require a buyer to go and invest in substantial repairs. And so we've actually revised our process to inspect all homes before we put them on market so that we know exactly what the state of the home is. But generally speaking, our predictions are quite accurate, to on average within about 1%.
And this actually takes me to my final question for the chat, which is, we're slowly reopening. It seems like the pandemic is coming to an end, hopefully. What's the first thing you're going to do once this is all over?
Probably go on a trip with my wife and baby outside of Canada, somewhere warm, and yeah, share a drink, share a meal in a way that we just couldn't before.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for this chat. It was incredibly informative, and to get an insight into some of the trends that we're seeing in the real estate industry in Toronto, but also to get a sense of the product and how you're going to be transforming the way people buy and sell their homes. It was incredibly informative. Thank you so much for joining us today.
No, thank you. It was my pleasure. And for anybody interested in learning a bit more about Properly, our website is properly.ca. Very simple. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
And you're also hiring, which is fantastic. So also check that out.
There's about 30 open roles. Yeah, check it out.
Amazing. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. More experiences coming up over the course of the month. So keep an eye on your inbox. But have a great day. Stay safe. And looking forward to seeing you at the next one. But bye for now.